KaOS Linux just became the most talked about distro in the Linux community this week because they shipped their first stable ISO that replaces systemd as the init system. And the takes online have been absolutely all over the place. Some people are calling this the beginning of the end for systemd. Some are calling it proof that ditching systemd breaks everything. And a third camp is saying KaOS is a fringe distro nobody uses, so who cares? All three of those takes are wrong. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what KaOS actually did, what it didn't do, whether any of the drama is warranted, and most importantly, whether this is a distro you should actually consider switching to. Let's get into it. So KaOS released their 2026.06 ISO on June 23rd, and the headline is that they've replaced systemd as the init system with something called dinit. But here's what most coverage is getting wrong straight out of the gate. KaOS is not systemd free. Their own release announcement says it plainly. A reduced systemd is still in use for udev and temp files. elognd is also present solely to keep polkit working. This is not a zero systemd system. It's a system where systemd is no longer your init, where it no longer manages your services, your startup sequence, your boot orchestration. That job now belongs to dinit, with turnstile handling sessions and seatd handling seat management. That's a significant change, but it's not the clean break the headlines are implying. So myth number one out of the way early. The other thing that happened simultaneously, and this is the part that's getting undersold, is that KaOS also dropped KDE Plasma from the default ISO. They've been using KDE Plasma for 12 years. It was their whole identity. Now the default desktop is a Wayland compositor called Niri combined with a shell called Noctalia. The distro is still Qt focused and GTK free, but the flagship desktop is gone. That's not a minor footnote. That's a complete reinvention of what KaOS is. This transition didn't come out of nowhere. The KaOS team published an explanation of their reasoning back in February, and it traces back to upstream changes in systemd itself. Systemd 254 was the last version to fully support KaOS's split/user layout, which is a specific design choice they'd built around. Later systemd versions dropped compatibility paths that their setup depended on, so the maintenance burden was already climbing. Then KDE Plasma started deepening its systemd ties. The specific trigger was the Plasma Login Manager, which shipped with Plasma 6.6 and requires systemd. KDE's position when this blew up was that they're not forcing systemd, that you can use other display managers, which is technically true. But from KaOS's perspective, you're now maintaining a non-standard configuration against an upstream that considers your setup legacy. Every new Plasma release is a potential maintenance problem. So KaOS made a pragmatic call. Rather than fight that battle indefinitely, they changed the desktop. Plasma is still in the KaOS repositories and will remain there through Plasma 6.7, but once KDE releases 6.8, Plasma gets removed from KaOS entirely. That clock is ticking. It's also worth noting that not everyone agrees the KDE dependency creep was as dire as KaOS framed it. The init transition itself has been in the works since 2025. 3 years of preparation, a year of active trials and rebuilds to get this stable ISO. This wasn't a rage quit. It was a deliberate engineering project. Since this is the core of what changed, it's worth spending a minute on what dinit actually is. dinit is a service manager and init system. It starts your services in parallel, respects dependency ordering between them, and is designed to be modular. It works alongside other system components rather than absorbing them. It's lightweight, it's written in C++, and it's actively maintained. It's not a fringe experiment. dinit is already the default init on Chimera Linux and UOS. It's an available option on Artix Linux and AntiX, and now KaOS. The ecosystem around it is small compared to systemd, but it's real and growing. The KaOS startup stack now goes: dinit handles init and services, turnstile sits on top and handles user sessions, seatd manages seat access for Wayland, greetd with TUI Greet replaces SDDM as the login manager because SDDM's tight integration with systemd made it a bad fit for the new setup. For the user, most of this is invisible. You boot the machine, you get a login prompt, you get your desktop. The difference is what's happening under the hood. Okay, so here's where we get practical, because this is the section that matters. The KaOS dinit 2026.06 ISO is the first stable release with this setup, and stable means the devs are confident enough to push it to all existing existing users, running pacman-syu on a current KaOS system will prompt you to replace systemd. That's a significant commitment. They're not asking you to opt in, they're making it the default migration path. But stable does not mean complete. There are documented limitations in this release that you need to know about before you install it. RAID installations are not supported. If you're running RAID, you cannot use this ISO. XFS is unavailable for BIOS installs because of a grub compatibility issue with the current XFS version. Polkit is not fully ported to the turnstile and seatd setup yet. That means some privilege escalation operations won't work. Things that need admin confirmation at the desktop level may silently fail or require workarounds. VirtualBox support is limited. You have to enable 3D acceleration and use VMS VGA because the entire desktop is Wayland only now, and VirtualBox doesn't support Wayland properly. So the practical answer to should you switch to KaOS right now depends entirely on who you are. If you're an existing KaOS user who's been following this transition, you're probably already comfortable with the direction and the update is straightforward. Run the upgrade, the migration is automated. If you're someone considering KaOS fresh because of this news, you need to understand you're adopting a distro that is in the middle of a fundamental reinvention. The desktop is new, the init stack is new, and the documentation and community tooling are still catching up. This is not the same distro it was a year ago. That's not necessarily bad, but be clear-eyed about it. If you're someone who wants systemd free Linux as a daily driver right now, and you have conventional hardware with no RAID, no unusual privilege escalation requirements, KaOS is actually one of the more mature options available. Dinit is production ready. The Niri-based desktop is functional, and I love it. The move to Liming or Limini as the bootloader is a genuine improvement. This is the hot take angle that I want to address directly, because it's already circulating. No, KaOS dropping systemd as init is not a sign that systemd's dominance is collapsing. The realistic answer here is that this is a small, independently developed distro making a rational decision for its specific situation. Ubuntu isn't doing this. Fedora isn't doing this. Debian isn't doing this. The major distros have years of infrastructure built around systemd and no practical incentive to change. That is not changing because of KaOS. What this does represent is something more modest but still real. The non-systemd ecosystem is maturing to the point where a polished, usable, Qt-focused desktop Linux distribution can actually ship with an alternative init and have it work. A few years ago, pulling that off at this level of integration would have been genuinely hard. Now KaOS has done it, and the result is functional. Myth number 3, that this is fringe and irrelevant, also doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The technical work KaOS did on integrating dinit, turnstile, and seatd in a stable way is useful knowledge for the broader non-systemd ecosystem. And the pressure on KDE to document and support non-systemd configurations better is a legitimate conversation that this forces. To summarize, KaOS did something real this week. They completed a multi-year engineering project, shipped a stable init transition, and fundamentally changed what their distro is. The systemd framing is overstated since systemd components still handle udev and polkit. The broken distro framing ignores that the documented limitations are real but narrow, and the irrelevant fringe framing misses the actual technical work that went into making this viable. Whether you switch is a practical question with a practical answer. If your hardware fits the current constraints and you're comfortable with a distro mid-reinvention, it's worth trying. If you need RAID or full polkit support out of the box, wait for the next release cycle. If you found this useful, subscribe and tip me or buy me a coffee. My Ko-Fi link is in the description. Also, let me know in the comments, are you guys using KaOS or is it KaOS? Was I wrong? Oh well. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.